So somebody had asked this question: what's the moral obligation for the courts or laws under, the First Amendment? And this is actually something that is taken into consideration in a lot of these letters of the Federalist Papers. So I'm not going to note any specific ones. In fact, in the very first letter that's talking about despotism and tyranny, Federalist 1, it talks about what would cause that kind of situation. What traits of humankind would create that situation when people are given power. And so let's start here. Candor will oblige us to admit that even such men may be actuated by upright intentions, and it cannot be doubted that much of the opposition which has made its appearance or may hereafter make its appearance will spring from sources blameless at least, if not respectable, the honest errors of mind led astray by preconceived jealousies and fears. So numerous indeed and so powerful are the causes which serve to give a false bias to the judgment, that we upon many occasions see wise and good men on the wrong as well as on the right side of questions of the first magnitude to society. And this circumstance, if duly attended to, would furnish a lesson of moderation to those who are ever so much persuaded by their being in the right in any controversy. And a further reason for caution in this respect might be drawn from the reflection that we are not always sure that those who advocate the truth are influenced by purer principles than their antagonists. Ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives not more laudable than these are apt to operate as well upon those who support us upon those who oppose the right side of a question. Were there not even these inducements to moderation, nothing could be more ill-judged than that intolerant spirit which has at all times characterized political parties. For in politics as in religion, it is equally absurd to aim at making proselytes by fire and sword. Heresies in either can rarely be cured by persecution. And we can look at the history of religion, and we can track it down to the wars that have happened under this holy idea. And we can see that a lot of the most violent wars that we've seen in history has been under this banner of being about God. But if you really look into it, if you really look into the history of each of the religions, you're going to start questioning whether there was really about God, or if it was more about a power grab or a natural resource grab or land grab. And so I've had a lot of these different conversations with the different religious groups all across the world, and each one is claiming that they are the promised ones, that their group and only their group is the ones that are promised by God. But if it's all kind of related, if you can trace back the origins to all the same point of Abraham and Abraham's God, then how is it that it's not all just the same God? And so we start looking into the origins of religion, and we can look at Christianity in the United States today. And we have a lot of denominations, and each of the denominations have their own set of rules. And those own set of rules have put these churches in competition of each other, where instead of seeing each other using the same Bible and using the same God and using the same verses, they are challenging each other and saying, you're wrong, I'm right. And so we get this competition that should not exist if you really follow the dictations of Christ under Christianity, because that's why you're called a Christian, you're following Christ. And so we're looking at that saying, well, how is it that these churches are competing in this mine, me first environment when Christ says the first will be last? And his entire ministry is about humbling yourself and making yourself into a servant attitude. So we start getting a conflict even within the denominations of the Christian churches inside the United States and across the world itself. And so if we're looking at these churches and they're pushing guns now, and they're claiming that God has given the right to own a gun. Well, we weren't born with a gun. And if we redefine a gun as a hazardous tool that is specifically designed to kill humans, and we look at that hazardous tool in the palm of a hand and says, well, that gives us godlike power to determine right from wrong, life or death, judgment on any person. And isn't a jealous God only the one who is allowed to do that? It kind of goes against the whole idea of do not judge. Yet churches are saying God gives you the right to have a gun in your hand, and the gun's only purpose is to kill a human. That's why it was designed. Yeah, it can be used for hunting, but the guns we're talking about right now are not hunting guns, unless you're talking about hunting humans. There is no other reason for them except for war purpose. And for a church to push that is a really odd thing, because how can they be pushing something that opposes the idea of Christ and claim it is from God? So we start looking at the origins of these religions and the context from which they preach. Yes. And we start to question what is really going on here. And so we have this First Amendment that says basically that it is a separation. It is a wall that says, here's the church and here's the government. And we have to realize that the founding fathers came from Europe. And if you know the history of Europe, if you've been following the history of Europe and what was going on during that time period, where we had the Protestant Reformation with the nailing of the edicts from Martin Luther, and then we had Anne Boleyn, and she was able to get King Henry to separate from the church so that he would marry her. And then the daughter from that union was Elizabeth, and some people claim that Elizabeth might be involved with Shakespeare, who was then able to expose a lot of this corruption right in front of the peasants. So then we have this revolution, and we have more and more breaking away from the church. And then, of course, you have Galileo, the scientist who discovered that the sun is the center of the universe. And you had the church that made them recant of that discovery because it challenged the idea that the earth or man was on par with God. So we have these instances in history where religion is constantly trying to impinge itself into the government, into science, to create this hold, this idea of suppression and oppression on people when it conflicts with the very idea of Christ. So how can that be Christianity? And so if we look at, this is a great book. It's called Religion and the Constitution. It was written in 1964, and it's quite complex, but it's from the Edward Douglas White Lectures of the Louisiana State University in March 1964. And he talks about how SCOTUS has taken the First Amendment and have manipulated it with the different court cases to remove what should have been a firm wall of separation of church and state to what we have today, which today, if you look at it, we are using the First Amendment to give special privilege to a chicken restaurant. I'm sorry, Chick-fil-A is not a church. It is a chicken restaurant. It is not allowed to get any special privileges that the rest of us small businesses or big businesses don't get. It's not fair. And so you're using that First Amendment because they're Christian-based to give a chicken restaurant special privileges. And that is illegal. It is a violation. It is abuse of power. And you cannot do it. And so my startup corporation is going to call them out because I can. This is how capitalism works. And so here we go from the Religion and the Constitution in the section about the First Amendment. It gives three different areas where how SCOTUS has kind of manipulated the First Amendment and changed it. And it's interesting because even here, there's still that solid wall that's created from these cases if you look at the dissent of the judges. Where we are today is not where we were in 1964. In 1964 is where everything started to happen. In 1964, we had the Chicago School of Economics, a couple boys, decide that the economic plan of the Founding Fathers of rules and regulation were way too complicated, and they were going to replace it with a fictional novel by a Russian who wrote in 1934, Ayn Rand. And so that is what our economic structure has been based on ever since. That's also when credit card companies came into being. It's also when GM decided it was no longer going to be about the factory workers and turned itself into an institution. During 1960s is when the real engineers got kicked out of the manufacturing industries and all decisions became financial engineers and corporate shareholders. This is when this happened. And so, of course, we're looking here at the religion part of it and the First Amendment. And as all this corruption is going on and we're turning into a corporate monarchy, religion has now been tapped into a vulture capitalism that allows people to remove the rights of citizens and claim it is religion. But it's not. Like I said, chicken restaurant, not a church. And when you look at different basic common sense of that, and you look at the churches within themselves who can't even agree on the same rules. So how in the world are we going to have the united, the Holy Church of America? Because which denomination is going to rule that church? I don't know. I mean, I think they'd have a war within themselves, the different denominations, each claiming that their rules, their founder rules, somehow offset the rules of Christ. It's gotten pretty extreme. But if we go to, this one is a couple of different theories, the strict separation theory, and this was the Epperson case. Trying to find the actual case. And if you get this book, I mean, it's pretty amazing. But anyways, he talks about the dissent of the judge, and Mr. Justice Black gave a broad and comprehensive interpretation of the establishment clause, an interpretation founded on his conception of the historical purpose underlying this clause as evidenced by the views of Madison and Jefferson. Yeah, I've left a couple of different churches. I grew up under the Baptist church. So I understand. But with this, and what people don't realize, and in fact, I actually worked at a Disciples of Christ Christian church, and they have a great book called The Journey of Faith, the Journey of Faith, the History of the Disciples of Christ Christian Church. And Barton Thomas and Campbell were right there with that whole revolution that was happening when all the churches, after we gained our independence from Europe. And if you look at that book, they talk about Thomas Jefferson and the Baptists insisting upon a separation of church and state, and they explain it as a need to have free market competition because the people, having no longer requirements of having to attend church, were not attending church. And so they needed to have that free market establishment of churches so that people were free to choose to go to whatever church they wanted, because we had this denomination boom, Protestant boom that was happening. And so each one were vying for the available population, and they were no longer under any constraints because Europe and the government had mandated, they were under this mandated, you had to be at church. Remember the Puritans? You had to be at church and you had to sit there. And if you didn't do this, you got punished. And if you weren't still, you got punished. I remember that lesson. I'm Virginian, so I remember that lesson. And so, we have that. And that is the culture that they came from. And then we gain our independence from this, and now people aren't going to church. And we have this Protestant boom. And so it's like, okay, in order to get people to come to our church, we have to honor the right to worship any way that you want, including not worshiping anyone at all. And so that's the whole purpose of the First Amendment, because they understood that the things that are involved in the religious aspect can be easily manipulated, yes, in order to get people to do things that are ethically against their own moral code. And if we look at 1934 Germany, they used the evangelicals to preach the propaganda that claimed Hitler was basically the savior. 60% Germans were Christians. 10% were Jews in 1934. And the whole doctrine was under this Christian idea. So even then, and we understand what happened then, we saw how a religious group was targeted and they were pushed out, and the money that they had was stolen. They could literally steal their property, they could steal their money, they could steal their inheritance, they could steal everything. And at the same time, they were trying to get rid of all culture, they were trying to get rid of all arts, all free thinking, and then they used the people, the SS soldiers, to go after any political opponents. So they were able to consolidate all power, this very small minority group, consolidate all power using a Christian ideology that was pushed by the evangelicals. And of course, they attacked the gays, the LGBTQ community, so homosexuals. And so, if you look at, if you go to like Wikipedia, I get really nervous. I'm not used to doing this kind of stuff. But if you go to, or Wiki Image, or just anywhere that has like the Nazi placards of what the prisons was, look to see who the badges and what they meant. Great, my daughter just came in. I lost my spot. So I'm going to read you this real quick and then I'm going to finish. So this is from Mr. Justice Black. The Establishment of Religion Clause of the First Amendment means at least this. Neither a state nor the federal government can set up a church. Neither can pass laws which aid one religion, aid all religions, or prefer one religion over another. Neither can force nor influence a person to go to or remain away from church against his will, or force him to profess a belief or disbelief in any religion. No person can be punished for entertaining or professing religious beliefs or disbeliefs for church attendance or non-church attendance. No tax in any amount, large or small, can be levied to support any religious activities or institutions, whatever they may be called. Okay. Hey, Ivy, that's being very rude. I know, I'm almost done. No tax in any amount, large or small, can be levied to support any religious activities or institutions, whatever they may be called, or whatever form they may adopt to teach or practice religion. And neither the state nor the federal government can openly or secretly participate in the affairs of any religious organization or groups, and vice versa. So the politicians who are participating in that the prayer breakfast are actually breaking the law under the First Amendment if we go by this Justice Black interpretation of it, because they should not be using a religious field in order to manipulate the congregation of those churches for a religious purpose or for a political purpose. In the words of Jefferson, the clause against the establishment of religion by law was intended to erect a wall of separation between church and state.
Mommy, come watch something.
Okay, I will. Give me 5 minutes, okay? And then I'll be right down, I promise. Then we have this other case that he talks about, and the accommodation theory, and that's Zorach and Clausen. And this is Mr. Justice Douglas' opinion, who says there is much talk of the separation of church and state in the history of the Bill of Rights. And if you remember, Bill of Rights is constantly being talked about by these groups who are claiming that God has given us these rights. God has created the U.S. Constitution. God has given us, God has given us, God has given us. It's unalienable rights by God. There cannot be the slightest doubt that the First Amendment reflects the philosophy that church and state should be separated. And so far as interference with the free exercise of religion and the establishment of religion are concerned, the separation must be complete and unequivocal. The First Amendment, within the scope of its coverage, permits no exception. The prohibition is absolute. The First Amendment, however, does not say that in every and all respects there should be a separation of church and state. Rather, it studiously defines the manner, the specific ways in which there should be no concert or union or dependency one on the other. So how is it that this judge just said that it can be absolute and undetermined? He just said, I don't know if you caught it, but he literally just said it permits no exceptions and the prohibition is absolute. And then the next breath, he states, it does not say that in every and all respects there should be separation of church and state. So he just conflicted himself in his own dissent. And so if we look, we see a lot of that happening where they'll state that this is absolute and cannot be changed. However, yes, it's that however. And then you're like, wait a minute here, because you just stated that this is absolute and cannot be changed. And then in your next breath, you just changed it. And this happens a lot in these court systems and in these judge systems. And they should not be doing that because it's not reflecting the laws of the U.S. Constitution anymore. It's implying some other agenda that's trying to offset it. So let's see where he goes with this, because now he has contradicted himself. Let's see. Shall be a separation of church and state. Rather, it studiously defines the manner, the specific ways in which there should be no concert or union or dependency one on the other, and that is the common sense of the matter. Otherwise, state and religions would be aliens to each other, hostile, suspicious, and even unfriendly. Well, that's true, and that's what we're seeing right now. We actually have a religious group who is saying that Americans are anti-Americans because they don't follow this political party. And they don't believe the things that they believe. So that has made them anti-American. We're seeing this right now. Churches could not even be required to pay property tax. Municipalities would not be permitted to render police or fire protection to their religious groups. Policemen who help partitioners into their place of worship would violate the Constitution. Prayers in our legislative halls, the appeal to the Almighty, and the message of the chief executives, the proclamation making Thanksgiving Day a holiday. So help me God, are in our courtroom oaths. These and all other references to the Almighty that run through our laws, our public rituals, our ceremonies would be flouting the First Amendment. So by this, we could say, well, the people who are trying to force, in God we trust in schools, is flouting the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment, by this justice's own dissent from this court case. So this makes a good court case for anybody who's trying to defend this idea. So a fastidious atheist or agnostic could even object to the supplication with which the court opens each session, God save the United States in this honorable court, under the First Amendment. I mean, if this is what it's going to take in order to remove the power of the religious groups that has manipulated the First Amendment to remove the rights of Americans, maybe this is what's going to have to be necessary. And I'm saying this as a Christian because as a Christian, I'm seeing this saying this is not even my God that's being celebrated or being preached. Because again, Christ was all about servanthood and humbleness, and the first will be last. So all these churches who are claiming me first, me first, me first, America first, is not following within the tenets of Christ himself. So, if that's what it takes, is taking this dissent and doing exactly what he says and saying, well, we have his saying that this is what the First Amendment would look like. This is what it protects. And so we can go after these things and use this dissent as the case. This is how courts work. Whatever facts that you can bring forward in order to support your emotional agenda is what you use. Thank you. We are religious people whose institutions propose a supreme being, and we guarantee the freedoms to worship as one chooses. We make room for as wide a variety of beliefs and creeds as the spiritual needs of man deem necessary. If you want to worship the spaghetti monster, under the First Amendment, you have that right to worship, is exactly what he's saying here. We sponsor an attitude on the part of government that shows no partiality to any one group and that lets out each flourish according to the zeal of its adherents and the appeal of its dogma. So why are Muslim women who are Congress members being attacked and called anti-American? If we have that religious group in America, then they deserve, and they're citizens, they deserve to have representation. And the 14th Amendment citizenship is naturalized also. So not only is it born into, but accepted into the United States as a foreigner. So we have that law, the 14th Amendment, that covers that. And yet we have these religious groups who are claiming to be Christian, going after Muslim women and calling them squad, and calling them anti, and getting them forced out of not only the Congress, where we need more representation of more religious groups and more parties and more people and more minority groups. We need this in Congress because this is the representative body of the United States of America. Yes, and it's not even, it's greed agenda. It's consolidation of power and wealth. It's removing the rights. It's the things that our founding fathers were opposed, and this is why we went to war. These are the things that we're starting to see again because we're going backwards, and people don't know the U.S. Constitution. People who claim to be experts are writing these books that our president is now hawking, and they're not real. They are violating the entire history of America, and they're claiming to be, this is what it is because I'm emotional and I'm going to put an emotional agenda and I'm going to accuse all these other people of doing stuff. I mean, if you look at it, the first political parties was the Republican Party and the Democratic Republican Party. Why are they Republican? It means big government. So the Republican Party itself is violating its own party, the whole purpose of its creation. Democracy, small body of government. Republican is a large body of government. Federal government is our large body of government. Democracy is our state governments. It gets, whenever you look at it, common sense and logic like that, we look at the entire party structure and we say, what in the world's the point of it? Because it turned us all into these raving fans. And we no longer even understand what our structure of law is all about. It's become emotional. It's become reality TV. It's not simple, common sense structure of governments. And when the state encourages religious instruction or cooperates with the religious authorities by adjusting the schedule of public events to sectarian needs, it follows the best of our traditions, for it then respects the religious natures of our people and accommodates the public service to their spiritual needs. You know why we shouldn't have religion in schools? Because the students are forced to be there. There is no measure in which they can leave if they don't want to be a part of that religious institution. If you force religious prayer into schools, then you have to allow the students to opt out. And if you don't have that option, it should not be there. People don't need to be praying out loud because Christ says you should be praying in silence anyways. You should be praying in secret. And there's a lot of parables in the Bible that's talking about the arrogance of people who do that, you know? So we have this manipulation of religion that is trying to force itself not only on the kids and our youth, but also within our establishments and taking away the public schools by attacking the teachers and claiming that they're no longer this moral guide whenever the lawyers are the ones who have this moral code that they're not even following. The teachers do not. There is no teacher code of professional conduct and ethics, but there is an attorney one and there is a judicial one. And so we have these people who are able to sue the teachers, putting a moral standard on the teachers that it's not even theirs to hold. And I guess whenever you can manipulate the justice system, when you have control of the justice system like that, you're able to do that. And the lawyers are able to get away with it because the paralegals are told that it's a felony to practice law if you don't have a JD. But I just have a paralegal certificate. I'm the corporate lobbyist of the exploited around the world and the children of all living kids. So under that corporate lobbyist, I can teach the rules of law and I can teach these things because you are basically my clients. And I work pro bono. So what are they going to do? Yes. And that if you look at history, if you look at the history of dictatorships happen first by creating fear, and then second by telling the people they have no rights. And when you have those two things in play, you can remove the rights of the people. I would love to be, but I don't have the support. I can't afford to be, I would love to be president. Right now, I can't see anybody who actually has the interest of the people at heart. I see rich geriatric, and I don't see anyone who actually understands manufacturing, and that 99% is far greater than 1%. I see everybody manipulating the laws to benefit a corporate monarchy that is stealing from our U.S. Treasury and forcing us to pay more taxes, while the people who don't pay into any taxes are getting all our bailouts and all of our money. And so I think if religious institutions really want to be a part of the government, if they want to influence it, we need to start taxing them. They need to start paying into the government just like everybody else, just like any other organization that's out there, because they're violating the First Amendment. And so under that, we can start charging churches taxes, religious institution taxes, and we can get rid of these things that hide under religion and is able to be tax exempt, and their donors are able to have their taxes, the things that they donate to these causes, basically reimbursed or avoid having to pay taxes because they're donating to these organizations. But these organizations aren't really about religion. They're about consolidation of power, and they're inviting these politicians onto their stages in order to manipulate their congregations. And they're claiming that God endorses this. No. It's not even a matter of not believing in a Catholic school. If this Catholic school wants to have, a Catholic group, a Catholic branch where they teach Catholicism and all this stuff, that's fine. But they fund it themselves. They be capitalists. They don't use the government money for that. And the same for all the other religious schools. And these religious institutions have been claiming they want to be capitalists. They hate socialists. Socialism is taking our taxes and the government money and giving it to groups. So if they don't want that, then they can be capitalists. They can support themselves. Their donors can give to God and not get any tax refunds for it, because if you're giving to God sacrificially, you're not supposed to get any money back. Otherwise, it's a loan. It's not giving. So, they can totally support themselves, and I have no problem with that. Same with the Baptist churches, same with the Methodist churches. They can be fully funded. I mean, they have the money. If you look at the organizations, the religious organizations that are nonprofits who are violating their 501c3 rules, they have millions and millions and millions of dollars. But they go after the arts, who is struggling. You have the engineers of these arts, and they have to basically work for exposure and free to do their passion, while these groups are claiming that they're all this stuff. In fact, the religious groups went after the liberal colleges, the liberal art colleges, which is how I got involved in all of this to begin with, because it affected my entire life. And I just wanted to teach them a lesson on what real, pure capitalism looks like. This is what free market capitalism looks like. Corporate takeovers. And so I created a startup corporation, turned myself into, I used to be an adjunct, turned myself into a corporate lobbyist. I advocate for the exploited around the world and all kids. I'm the loophole of Citizens United. My company also serves as a loophole for corrupt governments. We work with the investigative agents. So we give them a loophole and we expose the laws that should be exposed. And then we protect the U.S. press, we protect the press, we protect the people. All of this being done and following what James Madison says to do in Federalist 10. Extend the sphere and you remove that source of corruption, because when you have everybody involved, now nobody can get away with things. So when we're more actively involved in our government, and I did the citizenship, it was a government school academy that they offered here, and I think every city offers it. It's a free course, and it was like a couple of weeks, and I got to learn the entire city departments, and I got to talk to everybody, and it was cool because as an advocate, I got ignored. As a student, they had to listen to me. So I actually didn't get brushed off, and it was really nice. And this was before I did my company. But I learned how the different departments worked, and when I asked these common sense questions, they looked at me like I had horns growing out of my head, saying, well, we didn't even consider that. And that's the problem. They're not communicating with each other. And so we have the different departments, it's not communicating with each other. And, the different branches not communicating with each other. And then you have this justice system that's just manipulating everything into their own advantage. And they're placing people into these positions who should be held accountable to an attorney code and a judicial canon, including the people in Congress and the USAG. And they're not even following their own rules, not only in the profession, but under the Department of Justice conflict of interest rules. If you went by that policy alone, USAG Barr should not even be a USAG. He would be disqualified. So even the Department of Justice is not following its own policy. And it's because we don't know our laws, we don't know the Constitution, and we're counting on these people who's claiming to be experts to just spoon feed us with excitement and entertainment. It's not entertaining. I'm sorry to say. It's boring. I mean, this book, there's a lot here, and it's a great book, but it takes a while to read. It's not something that's going to just give it to you spoon feed. You're going to have to, what I usually do with these kind of books is I take a crayon and use it as a highlighter, but I got to go too. But that's your lesson. So when you're more aware of what the First Amendment is, what the 14th Amendment is, I have a podcast that talks about the Second Amendment. When we become more aware what the U.S. Constitution is, the Ninth Amendment protects all the other laws. We understand what our rights are, and we don't need to have guns to defend it. We just need to have our power and knowledge of laws, and then use our First Amendment to enforce the grievance. If we've been harmed, that we can use any of our government agencies and use, including our FBI, our CIA, our watchdogs, whatever it takes to get relief from that harm. Okay, I'm going to go. Thanks, guys.